Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way on a Thursday night with a big live stream that's kicked off by Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football. We've got a number of interesting topics inside and outside the SEC to hit on tonight. We've got Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and that just gets us going this evening. So, Mike, how you doing tonight?
Mark, doing fantastic. Always a pleasure to join you on Mark Rogers TV.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Always enjoy the conversation, and it starts right there at home for you with Tennessee recruiting, which right now ranks ninth in the SEC, number 19 overall, according to 247's composite, with 7 hard commits. What are the storylines, and what's the latest for you?
Yeah, so Tennessee's sitting at 19, coming off a disappointing 2018 recruiting season. That's kind of the bad news. The good news for Volunteer fans, however, is that Jeremy Pruitt and his staff are certainly on the uptick with recruiting. 3 commits since May 1st. 2 of those are big-time recruits, starting with Wanya Morris, who's an offensive tackle out of Logan'sville, Georgia. He just got his 5th star with 247's reevaluation last week. And then just yesterday, Ramil Keaton from Marietta, Georgia, who's a wide receiver, he committed to Tennessee. He's their top 4-star recruit, and that was yesterday. Of the 7 hard commits, they do have 2 other 4-stars, Jackson Lampley out of Nashville and Jackson Lowe out of Cartersville, Georgia. Some interesting notes about these players. As far as Ramil Keaton, he's an interesting one. He plays at Marietta, Georgia High School, Marietta High School in Marietta there, just north of Atlanta. The thing about the key thing that Tennessee fans really have to be happy with is not necessarily him, although he's a great player, but that team has 4 players in the top 100 in the 2020 rankings, including the number 11 overall player who's an athlete, Eric Gilbert, number 42 player, B.J. Ojulari, the number 70 player, who is Harrison Barley, who's a pro quarterback, 6'5", 228, and then a 93 Jake Ray, 93rd rated player for 2020, who you're going to be familiar with. He's a commit to Ohio State at this time. Those first 3 players are uncommitted. So Ramil Keaton is a tremendous get as a high 4-star wide receiver out of Marietta, Georgia. But having 4 of his teammates in the top 100 of the rankings nationally for 2020, Tennessee would love to get a pipeline to a program like that. Tennessee has historically recruited Georgia well. I think 4 of their 7 commits right now are from Georgia, including the 3 of the top 4. So if they can get, if Pruitt and his staff can get into Marietta High School there and really develop a pipeline, even if they just get half of that 2020, they'll get 2 top 100 recruits from that school. That's just a tremendous appeal for any coach to get into that high school and for that 2020 class. So that's one of the key things for Ramil Keaton. The other thing, if you look at all these guys that Pruitt's recruiting, they're all big guys. Those top 4 guys, Wanya Morris, the offensive tackle, 6'5", 293, still got to get in a SEC weight room. The tight end, Jackson Lampley, the offensive guard Lampley, he's 6'4", 299. Tennessee hasn't seen an offensive guard hit 300 in several years, probably since the Fulmer era. Jackson Lowe, who's the tight end, who's the number 4 recruit right now on Tennessee's commit list, he's 6'5", 242. Even the wide receiver, 6'3", nearing 200. That's big for a wide receiver. So Tennessee's looking, you can see that Jeremy Pruitt's looking to win in the trenches, which has historically been the secret to success in the SEC. It's always been a conference, as they say, won or lost at the line of scrimmage. So Pruitt and his staff are definitely on the uptick as far as recruiting goes. They're also looking at Josh Belk, who's a transferring defensive tackle out of Clemson. And then, of course, Brandon Kennedy, a center out of Alabama, wants to transfer to Tennessee, but Nick Saban and the Alabama program is blocking that. Even though he's a grad transfer, they can still block that because it's an interconference transfer. So, Tennessee fans, the recruiting's not where they want it to be, but it's certainly trending upwards after these last 2 weeks.
So, Mike, that sounds like a next level type recruiting to me, in which you're not only looking at, we have a good shot at this guy, and he's our caliber player, and he's a fit, but maybe we choose to go in his direction over a comparable player who may be just as good a fit because he's going to lead us into the next class. He's going to build a pipeline to the next class.
Certainly, head coaches across the nation look at that, and certainly when you look at Pruitt at Tennessee, historically the state of Tennessee has produced some good talent. I've talked to you multiple times about Nashville and Middle Tennessee is getting better, probably one of the top 10 recruiting grounds of the country. But Tennessee has always had to rely on success in the Atlanta metro area and Georgia. To really get top talent across the board at Tennessee, they can't just rely on the Nashville, Middle Tennessee metro area, and they can't rely on onesies and twosies from Florida, Texas, and California. They've historically recruited Atlanta very well. They've historically recruited Georgia very well. You can see that Jeremy Pruitt has bought into that, and he sees the value of that. Of course, all the SEC schools want to get into Atlanta, but taking over the Tennessee program, he has the ability to kind of ride off of the success of the program in Atlanta, and that's clearly something he's looking to do. Not only keep a fence around Tennessee, but also get into Atlanta and continue that Tennessee success. Of note for the 2019 guys, of the top 10 guys in Tennessee, 6 remain uncommitted, so he's going to focus on probably 3 or 4 of those. He'd like to get at least 4 of the top 10 in Tennessee in the 2019 recruiting haul for Tennessee as well.
You're watching and or listening to Mark Rogers TV. We are the voice of college football. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I emphasize that just because I would say about 10 to 15% of the views that we receive are from subscribers. So everybody else has yet to subscribe, but please subscribe. And if you do the right functions with your notifications, they won't drive you crazy. Believe me, everybody I subscribe to on YouTube, I don't even know that they're there. We don't want to bother you with notifications, but if you love college football, this is the place to be. And if you enjoy the audio and prefer that route, Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher, just search Mark Rogers TV. We got some Tennessee football talk, also the SEC and college football and beyond with Mike Laval from Last Word on college football. And let's keep it in conference with the unfortunate news just here in the last 2 days that Mike Slive, dead at the age of 77, SEC commissioner from 2002 to 2015, in which he knew that he was ill at that point and stepped down. Roy Kramer obviously set the table for his prosperity in the conference, and Greg Sankey has taken over capably since. Mike, I have a number of things going through my mind, but I defer to you first and foremost in regards to your thoughts about Mike Slive.
Mark, I think the key thing about Mike Slive is you kind of look at him. He's like you said, Roy Kramer set the conditions for success. Roy Kramer had a history in the SEC and in the South. If you look at Mike Slive, he was kind of the not the guy you would expect to take over the SEC. Was born in New York, trained as a lawyer, went to school at Dartmouth, Virginia, and Georgetown. Did not have that Southern pedigree, that SEC pedigree, that football pedigree, not even the sport that drives the conference. But what he was able to do, he was able to through his legal practice or through his law practice, where he focused on representing the schools in with the NCAA. He was able to learn the NCAA system. He was able to learn the business of college football, but most importantly, he was able to build consensus. When you talk about these university presidents, head coaches, athletic directors, and the sheer amount of money in college football, to get everyone at the table and to get everyone to buy into a common vision. All these people at the table have different perspectives, different interests, and at heart, they have their institution and their program first and foremost. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just the reality of the situation. So what Mike Slive was able to do best was to get competing visions and competing agendas to agree for the common good, kind of like what Bill Belichick has done in New England. Suppress the egos and focus on the championships. That's a little bit harder when you're an administrator at college, because there is no championship for administrators or programs per se. And so when you take over the SEC, you've got 14. At that time 12 when he took over, and now 14 institutions, and all are focused on themselves. They're looking at their interests first. But to get all of those university presidents, athletic directors, and coaches of 19 or 20 different sports, all to row the boat together, is really what enabled his success and enabled the success of the SEC. In my article yesterday about Commissioner Slive, I said that whether you either love the SEC or you kind of hate the SEC, one of the two, whichever one it is, it's because of Mike Slive. He watched the Big 12 with the Longhorn Network, and he watched what happened when different schools kind of have competing agendas and can't come under the conference banner together, and that really split the Big 12, and it's probably the undoing of the Big 12. He looked at the Pac 12 and what they did with their owning their own network. They were very hesitant to let one of the TV stations or TV networks come in, and one of the cable networks come in and kind of buy into it like the Big Ten did. He learned from that. The SEC network is absolutely a driver for profit for the SEC. He learned from that. He got everybody in the conference to row the boat together, come under the SEC banner. And it was pretty interesting because the one thing that he understood probably before most people was that the power brokers, the owners of the college football product, if college football is a product, the owners of that are the conferences, not the NCAA. That's all the presidents that get together. But the people who drive the television deals and the profits for college football are the conferences. That's where the power lies. He was able to understand that, and he was able to get the SEC into a position where it's really, particularly when you talk about the revenue-generating sports, there's absolutely no doubt about it. The SEC is kind of the first amongst peers and the driving force in the current college landscape, particularly with the revenue generating sports. But that's what he was able to do. A fantastic leader, very humble man. Just one of those guys that as we look across the college landscape today, and there's desperate need for quality leadership. Mike Slive he kind of set the example of what that quality leadership in the college football administration arena looks like. So college football, the sport's going to miss him, and he really set a high bar for those that follow him.
So for the people watching us, of course, you love college football, and that's immediately the sport you think of when thinking of any of the conferences, but especially the SEC. So I will put to the side the excellence and the competitive nature of all the other sports, but you can select a sport: baseball, basketball, men's basketball, maybe to a lesser extent. There's been some bumps in the road, but men's basketball typically strong. But go to any of the other non-revenue sports, softball, tennis, and the like, and they are nationally competitive with any other conference, if not the standard for that sport. So all the sports are extremely strong. Maybe you can throw out one or two out of the 20, possibly, I don't know what it would be, that are not thriving at this point. But let's focus on football. If you look at the television portion of that, and I totally agree with your breakdown when looking at the other approach that the conferences have taken toward the television product, and the second best or second most successful effort has certainly been from the Big Ten. I think the difference you see in what the Big Ten produces versus the SEC network, because the SEC under Mike Slive chose to go with a major network that knows how to produce sports, and therefore you see a quality difference. I don't see much of the Pac-12 network, and I'm guessing that most of the people that we're talking to right now don't see a whole lot of programming from the Pac-12 network. It's not doing well, not in many American households. The SEC immediately made its way into 75 or 85% of the American households. The Big Ten is fairly close, but if you just look at the two offerings from a production quality standpoint and standpoint of programming, the Big Ten does a solid job, but it's not at the elite level, national, international, industry standard level that the SEC has been able to accomplish because of the ties to ESPN. Any way you want to measure the SEC in football, it is the gold standard. Rear ends in the seats, ratings on television, therefore money in the coffers that rose from, I believe, $95 million revenue per team in the SEC when Mike Slive took over in 2002 to the current $456 million per program. And then, of course, the championships and the winnings speak for itself.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I would push back a little bit on the Big Ten. 51% ownership by Fox, which is a major network that should know how to produce sports. But certainly, I think what really and the Big Ten network is, like you said, it's almost comparable to the SEC network. I think what the SEC did was market their product a little bit better. They tied it into the culture of the area. I think the Big Ten network kind of had a few marketing mishaps. The legends and leaders was not a good way to start. But like you said, they're comparable. But I certainly, I think with Fox and ESPN being the two owners of those two networks, at least Fox 51, in the conference 49%, which is a little bit different than the SEC network. But they still had, I think the difference is not who their partner was, but more of how they marketed it. And I think that's what Mike Slive did so well. He was able to market that culturally across the geographic landscape of his fan base.
So when I make that comment, Mike, I'm not speaking about success or ability to broadcast to households in terms of a marketing plan, a branding strategy, or the success financially. But I'm just looking at what I would rate as the quality of productions between the SEC network and the Big Ten network. The Big Ten's fine. It's good. It's quality. They have nothing to be embarrassed about. But the level at which the SEC produces documentaries and then the game productions, which is on a level with, for many reasons that I could explain, ESPN, ESPN2, you don't see a downgrade in quality. I think you do from Fox to the Big Ten network at this point.
Certainly, and you're absolutely right. And again, that's probably a product of Slive's ability to negotiate with ESPN and get them to invest in the infrastructure. The SEC network, which rides off ESPN, created and built their own studio in Charlotte. They don't ride off the Bristol backbone. They have their studios and their headquarters there in Charlotte. They made the commitment to come down to the southeastern part of the United States, albeit not in a state that's part of the conference. But they did build the physical infrastructure. Each of the schools has infrastructures, and they produce their own organic content. You're absolutely right. But again, that goes to Slive's ability to get ESPN, who's the worldwide leader, to kind of be an equal partner and get on that SEC boat and row with the conference, not necessarily competing against the conference, even though they're using their product. It just goes to show how shrewd he was and what kind of a quality leader he was.
Mike LaValle on the line from Last Word on College Football. We've discussed Tennessee, and we have looked at the passing of Mike Slive and his impact on the SEC and college football. I'm going to run down a few other notables, Mike, and you pick and choose what speaks to you. Of course, the expansion of Texas A&M and Missouri in 2012, most notably in football again. This was a conference that was riddled by probation and investigation at the time that Mike Slive took over in July of 2002. At that time, we had 9 SEC programs under probation or under investigation. He cleaned that up to a certain extent. And then, of course, African-American hires in prominent positions, notably head football coaches. Those are 5 under his reign, including the very first at Mississippi State, Sylvester Croom.
I think they're all important. I think as far as the cultural integration goes, I think the SEC has done that previous to Mike Slive. Certainly not at the head coaching level and the administration level, but the SEC has always been a leader there. If you go back, and of course they've wrestled with history, but they've shown a willingness to let football drive change. The expansion with Texas A&M and Missouri, I think that was very well done on his part. Again, he kind of surveyed the expansion field and didn't let the hysteria drive his decision-making. A very shrewd decision to get Texas A&M to pry them away from the Big 12. Again, that shows how shrewd of a leader he was to get A&M out of the Big 12, away from their big rival Texas, and to kind of do something that was for Texas A&M kind of going out on a limb for them, and it's turned out to be a resounding success for that institution. He went against the fan base, brought in Missouri, obviously an academic stalwart, kind of one of the only top tier academic institution, research institution in the SEC now, to kind of help the conference out with that. Again, that was against the fans' wishes. They really wanted somebody, either one of the holdout Florida schools or possibly Virginia Tech was another favorite, but he went with Missouri, which just turned out to be beneficial for the conference. But I think cleaning up the conference, his academic initiatives and his insistence on the presidents, the athletic directors, and the coaches to run clean programs. The SEC hasn't been perfect since, but a lot of people forget the Kentucky basketball scandal in the late 80s. Alabama was riddled with probation there in the 90s, and that was a program. What we see with the Saban Alabama now, people kind of forget that Alabama was teetering on possibly taking a nosedive after the Shula era and the Francione fiasco, and then some probation issues there in the early 90s. And they have now become, obviously, yet again, the flagship of the conference. But there was a time when Alabama was teetering on a nosedive there, and Slives, he was that type of leader who could, with a velvet touch, get everyone in line and show them that the institution's best interest laid with the success of the conference. Again, that's very hard to do when you have a lot of big egos and a lot of money at stake. But he was able to do that with a very deft touch and got all the institutions to buy into cleaning up, particularly the big time programs.
I was covering the SEC. Of course, I cover the SEC from afar right now, but on the field, going to all the news conferences, the whole deal for 6 years. And the three programs that I focused on during those 6 years, almost exclusively Alabama, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, constant investigation and very difficult investigations that all resulted in egregious findings and major probation. And for Ole Miss, it was almost the death penalty at that point. That was the discussion and could have been the decision. So, yeah, it was a difficult situation for the conference from that standpoint, and the reputation, the perception was not good. I will just hit on one thing with Texas A&M. It's easy for someone to sit and listen to you in 2018 and say, obviously, Texas A&M had an easy decision to move to the SEC, but they could have been very much a detached program, viewing it from that standpoint, thinking we're going to get lost in the SEC. We're going to be an attachment that's going to be kind of forgotten and out of place, and we're going to lose our base. We're going to lose our footprint in college football and in college athletics, detach ourselves from Texas, and we may get beaten down in the SEC and never become a true member perceived to be that way. And it was a more difficult decision than it appears to be in the aftermath.
Right. No. I was saying it was an easy decision for the SEC. What I said was for Texas A&M, they were kind of going out on a limb there. That was a tough decision for them. They were historically rooted, their fan base, with that Texas rivalry in the Big 12. No, that was definitely A&M going out on a limb. But again, Slive was able to convince them, much like he's able to convince the ESPN to build the infrastructure in the SEC conference. He was able to convince Texas A&M to walk away from 100 years, a century of history, and to join the SEC, which was definitely going out on a limb for A&M, but it has proven to be beneficial for both the conference and A&M, which again was Slive's it was his absolute strength, was finding the benefits of every deal for both the conference and the member institution. Perfect example of the value of his leadership.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for the very best in college football coverage, including discussions like this with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. Mike Laval on the line with us from Last Word on College Football. I encourage you to check out Mike's work and the rest of the staff there. Later tonight, we've got Tony Siracusa on deck to talk UCLA football at 9 o'clock Eastern time. We've got a situation that could be the story of the year when taken into totality of sports, and we'll give it the college football slant here, Mike. Of course, the Supreme Court just a few days ago struck down a 1992 federal law that effectively at the time banned commercial sports betting. Now the states have sovereignty after this ruling was struck down. And in addition to Nevada and parts of a few other states, this is wide open now for the states to make their own decisions about sports betting. So what do you expect what we're going to see over the ensuing months and years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. I think as far as the business aspect goes, I don't know. They'll figure that out. It's important to remember that there's always been betting on college football, either in Vegas or off the books and under the table elsewhere. So I don't think it's as radical of a shift or as a radical of a departure as some may make it out to be. But there are some concerns as far as the business. The business people will figure that out. That'll be driven by the books that already exist. As far as the on the field product, I don't think you're going to see much of a difference. What I worry about is the fabric of the game. Not so much that gambling threatens the fabric of the game. I think there's probably a little bit of an increase in probability there. You have to remember the NFL is highly regulated. There's only 32 teams. Power is distributed much more evenly. You have an involved front office. You have mature players that make a lot of money, et cetera. In college, there's far less distribution of power. You have 129 FBS schools. Power is kind of centralized in the head coach position. The players obviously don't make money. They're less mature just simply because of their age, not because of the quality of the person, but just because of their age. They're 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. They're a little bit more susceptible, to things. And they come into contact with a lot more people on a daily basis, whether it's classmates or people walking around an open campus. There's just a higher possibility for somebody to hit them up and talk to them and kind of convince them to do something that's not in the sport's best interest. So while I think there is probably a little bit of an increase in the possibility of that kind of stuff, point shaving going on, I don't see it as an imminent threat. I don't see it as an existential threat to college football. I do think there's probably a little bit higher chance that it might happen, particularly maybe at a second or third tier school, a lower kind of G5 school where people might think it might go unnoticed. But where I really think, where I'm really concerned is just, and this is just the traditionalist in me, really the fabric of the game writ large, as far as the fans go. I kind of liken it to what fantasy football did to the NFL. A lot of people don't really have a team in the NFL anymore. They might do it, but they watch all the games because they want to see how their fantasy team's doing, or they want to see how much money they're making or losing this week. There are fewer fans today that watch the NFL just for the pure joy of watching quality football. And you and I have talked about the college football playoff and the BCS and the bowls ad nauseum. And one of the things I always go back to is that what makes the college football game different than the NFL is there's still a regionalism to it. There's still a passion to it. There's still pageantry and parade to it. You're tied to your alma mater. You went to that institution or you grew up in that state and you cheer for that team because they represent your state. I think with the gambling, I think college football is going to become even more business-like. These companies they're going to want coaches to talk about injury reports because there's going to be a lot of money on that. The players, this is going to be another evolution of the players, another argument for the players to say, hey, we're making money for other people now, not just our schools and not just for the NCAA, but these sports books as well. This is yet another argument for the players to talk about getting compensated. Their likenesses. If you have a prop bet about how many touchdown passes is Tuivasa going to throw in the first quarter, that's a prop bet that uses the likeness of a player. So again, it's going to drive the business aspect of college football away from kind of the traditional amateurism of college football. And I think that's really going to be the biggest impact. I mean, are we going to see a day where college coaches have to give out injury reports 72 hours before games, just like NFL coaches have to do? And who's going to regulate that? Who's going to enforce that? Who's going to be the arbiter between the business interests that are asking for that from the game and the coaches who have traditionally not wanted kind of that business aspect and the distribution of power away from their office? So I think that's really, as I look into the crystal ball, I think that's what scares me most about this ruling. It's just college football turning more and more into a business rather than an amateur competition that kind of has regional and personal ties to a lot of the fan base.
Yeah, my initial reaction was positive for selfish reasons. I like to lay down a few bets on some college football teams. Nothing that's going to change my bank account in an extreme way or anything like that. But I enjoy trying to beat the system. So I do the same thing in the stock market. So it's just a competitive aspect of my own approach to watching the games, but it does not increase my interest in college football or any sports. I'm not a person that, again, I know exactly the people that you're talking about that have to manufacture interest in sporting events. And that drives me crazy. It's their own personal choice. It shouldn't drive me crazy, but being a purist, I enjoy watching the NFL, for example. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan who's not necessarily swayed by their outcomes, or I'd be obviously going insane at this point. So they really don't have my heart at this point. It would take them a great deal of winning to gain my heart, but just I enjoy watching NFL games. I'll watch the two worst teams in the NFL play, just like I'll watch two horrible Power Five teams play if nobody else is playing, because I enjoy the sport. I know a ton of people that have to manufacture ways to enjoy football, for example, and I find that a bit ludicrous because there's plenty of good books or home projects that they could be working on that would be much more productive than manufacturing a way to garnish some level of interest in a sporting event. Um, there's also just maybe less today than there would have been decades ago, a bit of an unsavory element that's attached to uh, this type of activity. And I know that might sound a little judgmental considering that I will enjoy taking part and have enjoyed taking part. But at the same time, from a larger standpoint, people that have less than honest interests, the people that you just mentioned, and I think the point that you made that struck me the most was the amount of people that a college athlete is exposed to versus the professional athlete whose schedule is very, not that they don't over the course of a calendar year have exposure to many more people potentially, but during the course of a season, because of the travel, the number of games played, a professional athlete much less of an opportunity to run paths and cross paths, I should say, with people that they don't know, as opposed to a collegiate athlete. And then again, the maturity aspect that you point out as well.
Mark, if I could pick against the line at 72% success rate like you do, I would partake in putting some money down too. I'm truly impressed every year when you come out above 70% against the line.
Well, it's maybe not quite that good, but it's something in that range. So we'll hope to nail it this time, and hope a lot of people are listening, so they'll listen to my predictions coming up this year, and hopefully I can get close to that because I definitely enjoy it. I'm somebody that was doing it at 10 years old when I barely knew what a line was, but watched Jimmy the Greek Snyder on the NFL Today and thought, man, that's cool, and instantly took to it.
Before his epic downfall.
Yes, certainly was. So that's Mike Laval from Last Word on College Football. As you can hear, not just with Tennessee, but really takes in the landscape of college football, and in particular the SEC. And he has a lot of good things to say and write. So if you want more perspective on the Mike Slive passing and his impact on the SEC and as the leader in college football, the entire nation, please check out Mike's work there and the rest of the crew there at Last Word on College Football. Before I let you go, Mike, anything else?
Nope. Happy to join you as always. Check us out at lastwordoncollegefootball.com, and I'm on Twitter at MikeL_LWS. Also on Mark's feed. Pleasure as always to join you, Mark.
And we are coming right back with Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama to talk the Tide. So keep it right here. Thanks, Mike.